have to say, I come to the stage in violent agreement with so many people that have presented at TEDx today. And what I wanted to spend my TEDx time talking a little bit about is building skills in the community and in the self through the act of doing, and how doing is such an important part of skill building that if I had $1.5 million to make a plan for a city, I would want to make sure that skill building in the populace through creating spaces to do activities, to build expertise, was a part of that plan. And I'm going to tell you, to make this point, I've got to try to thread several needles together. So it's going to get a little wide-ranging in the middle, but I think if you stick with me, I think we'll all end up here in the same place at the end. I hope we'll all be here at the end of the talk together. So I have to tell you a little bit about my experience with doing. What have I been building experience in, and how have I known that that experience that I've built through doing is valuable? Well, I got 2 degrees from University of Michigan, one in engineering physics and one in music education. But while getting those degrees, I was always in the act of doing both of those activities. And so if you look down at the bottom of this, I worked at Delco Electronics, that was over here on Davison Road and Center, making head-up displays and clusters. So I worked in the manufacturing part of Delco Electronics, and I worked in the product development part, making head-up displays. This is while I was in high school. Now, I wasn't doing all of this at a professional level at that point, but I was doing co-op level work. I also, at the same time, was getting the music degree and coming back to University of Michigan Flint. One of my colleagues is here in the summer, and participating as a teacher and a mentor, helping students at the Flint Summer Academy of Music at U of M Flint. And then I did my student teaching at Flint Central High School. The last year I was at college. Again, doing teaching is moving people from helping to move people from A to B using mentoring skills. Well, it's funny, I ended up having to make a decision and leave town. I went to Austin and worked at the company I work for now in the engineering leadership program, which is where we took recent graduates and we would move them from A to B at the company. If you look at the experience that I'd had in the 8 years previous to that, I had been doing both activities. They were a little separate, but when I got to the company, after about 3 weeks, they said, "Hey, can you join the leadership team of this group? Because it looks like you know what you're doing in mentoring people, and it looks like you know what you're doing in the professional space," because I'd been a professional, or I'd been in the professional space for engineering for about 8 years. That's the type of thing that can happen when you build experience through doing. I never had the experience at Delco Electronics, for instance, of feeling like I was above my skill set. I'll talk about that later. And then another interesting thing that happened that was similar to that is I went and became a salesperson for the company I work for now in Virginia. And Virginia has 2 big research universities in it, Virginia Tech and University of Virginia. And in my spare time, because of my background, I was interested in helping them to understand how to take theory that universities are very good at teaching and connecting it to the real world through technology. And I did that for 3 years while I was a salesperson. Didn't help me make quota, but the experience I got doing that and the results that we got, the skills that I built in myself in making that happen, well, the company said, "We want to figure out how to work with engineering universities to do this all over the place. And it looks like you know what you're doing in this area." I didn't even have to interview. They said, "Just go doing it." So I moved to Boston, and then over the past 5 years, I've been working with research universities, helping them to move back and forth along this path from theory to deployment. Now I live in Chicago doing the same thing. If I were to tell you one of the things, the biggest complaint I get from engineering teachers about the preparedness of engineers to do work, it's that they say that kids who come into engineering school, they have no common sense. They have no sense about how to apply math and science to problems. I'm going to stick a push pin in that, and we're going to get to it in another slide. But think about that as we continue. Another thing that I've been doing, when I moved to Austin from Flint, I found that Austin had a much different attitude towards how it thought about adding value to the world. In fact, a CNN Money article I must have read like a year and a half ago said there were 3 cities that were going to keep the US in the hunt economically for the next 20 years, and that was Boston, San Francisco, and Austin. And so I got there and I started to think, well, how can I help to add value, especially in my hometown? And I was lucky enough to have gotten a book from my cooperating teacher at Pierce Elementary, which told me about living well below my means. So living well below my means for a while, I was able to start to look for organizations or look for places for me to build skills through doing. And so I became a financial backer of a t-shirt shop that's in downtown Flint, where we add value to fabric by putting designs on top of, on them. I was a board member for a poker and gaming magazine where we added value to paper for people who were interested in that outlet. Also, in the act of doing these things, I've also been I've been making some other business plans. So I made 4 or 5 business plans. Again, how do you know when you're building skill and you're starting to become proficient at something? I wouldn't say I'm a proficient entrepreneur yet, by the way. But one of the ideas that we got together with a group of friends that I had at Harvard. We submitted it to the Harvard Business Plan Entrepreneurship track of their business plan competition in 2009. We got semifinalist status. I'm still working on that one, by the way, and I hope to have a Flint component to it at some point. I've also been doing some music, and then most recently, another thing that I'm still building skills through doing is I've started to go to Africa because of connections that I had through MIT. They were sharing equipment with African universities, and I'm now doing exactly what I do with universities in my day job. I take vacation, and I go to Africa, and I help universities in Nigeria, Uganda, and Tanzania to use technology to connect theory with practice. So if I were to break down my life and the things that I've been trying to build skills in and become an expert at, I would say that I sort of have expert-level skills-ish in some level of skill in engineering. I put music in, but it really is music education, and education is that mentorship thing all rolled into that. And then entrepreneurship, because I've been starting to build ability in that. Now remember, I told you about the problem that engineering professors have with lack of common sense of people coming into their field. Companies have the same thing, but I don't remember having the experience when I started at Delco Electronics of feeling like I didn't know what science or engineering was about. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about the path that got me from A to B there. In the 1st grade, my brother was made to do a science fair project at Walker Elementary School. And I watched him do that science fair project. He took shoe boxes and put different material in the shoebox and put a light bulb in the shoebox, turned the light bulb on, it heated up, and with the thermometer figured out which insulation material was better, right? So I watched that, and of course that was motivational for me because my brother was doing it, right? Well, at some point, it became my turn to have to do a science fair project. Thank you, Mr. Hale, for forcing us to do those in the 8th grade, by the way, if you're watching. And I used the same basic principle. I mean, I made a simple apparatus that figured out the stress I took 5x8 cards and put like I-beams between 2 cards and then angles and arches and hung weights from them and saw how they failed differently, right? I got 7th place in the Flint Area Science Fair from doing that, which for an 8th grader is a reasonable amount of money, right? So that motivated me over time. There was a lot of MTV watching in this span of time, but by junior year, I had been motivated by a couple peers and maybe a parent. Of course, my mother gave me a science fair booklet about things that you could do in a science fair, and ended up building a wind tunnel in my basement. I took that simple idea. It was just HVAC pipe. It was nothing special. I made a little apparatus to figure out what the wind drag on very simple shapes was, took that to the Flint Area Science Fair, and won the darn thing. Won $1,000, and the most important part was, one of the 8th level managers at Delco Electronics said, go get this kid, I want him to be a co-op. So I was just sitting in the choir room, minding my own business as a 12th grader, and somebody said, well, you know, Delco Electronics wants you to work for them. And I said, I don't want to be an engineer. I don't even know what engineers do, really. I'd been doing some basic science related stuff, but I didn't know what engineers did. Well, luckily, the HR lady, when I told her that, and my parents, when I told her that, said, why don't you try this out for a little bit? And certainly, you can see what's happened since. In the act of doing engineering, my attitude towards engineering changed. And if I were to break those 2 things down, and this slide is a yin and a yang, if you can't see it with the lighting here, where I would say that there were continually motivational experiences that led to skill building and deeper learning. Now, when we think about how we build skills in people, especially the ones that we care about most, right? We always hear math and science, math and science. And I'm going to bring a bunch of examples that are about math and science up, but you can apply this in any situation. To music, all of the things that I say are going to be completely applicable to music and any other of a bunch of different activities. But when we think about building skills in math and science in particular, we break everything down to things that are testable, right? You have people that are smart in math and people that are smart about talking about math and then talking about themselves, and that's what we test using standardized tests. But what I would suggest is that when you have a whole experience like doing a project or doing a project on a team, you actually end up exposing lots of different intelligences. This pinwheel is from Howard Gardner research in 1983. He looked at people who had brain damage, either stroke or a cyst in the brain that would knock out your logical ability in the brain or knock out your linguistic ability. But those people still were able to add value to their worlds, organize their worlds, and solve problems. So this isn't just a random set of intelligences that you might throw up on a screen. This is things that you could use to solve problems. Spatial intelligences, kinesthetic intelligences, interpersonal, intrapersonal intelligences. And what I'd really like you to get from this is that I believe that the act of doing whole projects and having those projects be put into the public space allows students to build skills in areas that we might not test for, but that they might be very good at. People who are very good at expressing science would do well in a science fair because all of a sudden they can rely on that ability. If I were really smart, I would also tell you about recent animal cognition studies that show that we're also pre-built to like technology, to memorize and categorize, and to solve problems. These are innate characteristics that everybody wants to be able to do, and everybody has a certain amount of skill when they're born with, and that these things can be trained. So now I want to talk a little bit about things that we do well. I think we teach sports and music really well, and I think it could be because we think that they maybe don't matter, right? I mean, they're not like, I mean, don't tell that to Lions fans, but I'll bring you guys up in a second. We don't teach basketball to a kid by saying, move your arm up and down over and over for a week, and when you've made the bouncing motion perfectly, then I'm going to let you have a ball, and then you're going to bounce the ball for another week, maybe two. And then we're going to take a step with the ball, and then we're going to take 2 steps with the ball. No. Very quickly you give kids a very simple set of rules, and you say, go towards the basket, right? And then you put them on teams with each other. And that holistic experience of learning that skill allows students to engage their interpersonal skills, they're moving through space, they're actually using physics, so they're building their natural, their understanding of the natural science of the world. It's that holistic experience that we use here that I end up seeing missing from the public discourse when we talk about teaching math and science. So what are some examples of things that give me some hope that you do get benefit when you teach math and science skills and any other skills in a holistic manner, and you bring people into a space where they can start to build skill in an area? Well, there's been a recent development. This actually wasn't around when I was using the Flint Area Science Fair as my vehicle, right? Having that Flint Area Science Fair. Notice I didn't talk about my schooling. When I talk about important points in my life, I'm talking about the things that I did associated with Flint Area Science Fair, right? Well, there's a whole set of students that are now participating in robot competitions. And the reason that these robot competitions came around was because an inventor about 17 years ago when I was graduating high school said, we don't have enough skills in these areas and we seem to be losing people. We've got to make this a whole experience. Well, now, 3,000 teams from across the nation in the robot competition that I work with at the high school level. I mean, there are 3,000 teams that compete, and of those teams, 2 years ago, of the 6 finalists of those 3,000, 5 of them were from the state of Michigan. We'll get to the importance of that in a little bit. This is also a picture of me at the Children's Museum in Chicago last weekend with some kids. The kids had left, but we ended up building a big... This is, again, We're not talking about math and science here. Chicago believes that it's a place for architecture, so it's exposing its kids to architecture very early through exhibits like this. No math and science anywhere around in the classic way that we deconstruct teaching those things. So why even talk about this in general? I mean, aren't we doing fine with our schools? Aren't we just teaching math and science left and right, and people are just happy to use it, and we're all getting the benefit from it? Well, if I were to, this is the second thing I need to weave together. If I were to bring up a book called The Outliers, which talks about the nature of successful people and what it takes to be successful, right? One of the tenets of that book, just one of them, is that after 10,000 hours of experience in something, your neurons begin to work at a world-class level, right? So you're able to do things that people who haven't had that 10,000 hours of experience, it takes them a lot longer to do. So you just kick the ball into the goal, or if you're a scientist and engineer, you say, oh, I know how to solve that problem. Let's just go do it, right? Well, 10,000 hours is 2.71 hours a day for 10 years. Who, the way that we teach math and science, is going to stick that out except for the people that were already going to be smart in math and science? Right? So my suggestion is that we need to create, or that people who plan for the creation of skill in their community need to open up a space where students and community members can work in that space, have motivational experiences that are broken down into small pieces, and those small motivations, one after another. You know, you get motivation the first time that you score the basket in basketball, right? Getting the reward to follow quickly on the act, so that at each step you get a conveyor belt of experience that puts you at 10,000 hours of experience at some point. So what do we want to have our kids spend 10,000 hours doing? This will take 2 minutes, Doug. Not even. We could have them do anything. They're going to spend 10,000 hours doing something, playing on Facebook, who knows what, right? Well, I would suggest that if I were planning for a community skill building, that the National Academy of Engineering has outlined 14 grand challenges, and Dane outlined some of them already, that are going to face our world over the next 100 years. It's the people that create spaces that allow for those motivational sub-steps to 10,000 hours of experience. People that create that sort of a pipeline in the direction of these 14 grand challenges, and you can look them up online at the National Academy of Engineering website. People who do that, their citizenry are going to get to these areas that the world is going to need. The world needs solutions in these areas. If you can create and add value to those solutions, then you're going to recoup the value that the world sees in those solutions. You're going to bring those back into the community, and we've already done this before. We took carriages and motors and put them together and solved the 20th century problem. These are the 21st century problems that if we broke them down and created space where kids could play in these areas, that we would have added value. Thanks.